Well, welcome everybody to the May issue of the South Dakota Forest Health Workshop. Today we're discussing emerald ash borer and pine wilt disease, update on management. We're happy to have you here. We are joined as always by Dr. John Ball, your host, the South Dakota Forest Health Specialist and SDSU professor, as well as the many other hats that he wears. But we're happy you can join us, Dr. Ball, to update us on these two particular pests, one invasive, one more native, and affecting non-native trees, as we'll learn. But we're happy to have you here. We're thrilled to have any master gardeners here. Keep in mind, this does count master gardeners as an hour of your required training or learning. If you are an ISA certified arborist, please do put your credentials in the chat box. Now we do, starting last month, we had an additional requirement. We want you to include your name, your credential number, and your email address. So if you are an ISA certified arborist or carry any ISA credentials and you're looking for CEUs, please put your name, your credential number, and your email address in the chat box. I'll make sure those get recorded and sent over to Dr. Ball for submission. Any SAF certified foresters, you are also eligible for a CEU for watching our live workshop. Please feel free to add your credentials and your name in the chat box. I'll make sure those get in the right hands as well. Our workshop is being recorded. These recordings typically go on our YouTube playlist. I just spoke with our IT department this last week, and there were some hiccups with new reporting or new uploading procedures, but we got all of our most recent workshops up on the YouTube playlist now. So before the end of the workshop, I'll make sure to drop that link in the chat as well. So you can go back and look at 30 or so of our previous 37 workshops. I can't believe we're on episode 38, I think it is, this month. So thank you all for your continued support. Thank you, Dr. Ball, for all the time and effort you put into sharing the tree news that's going on in our region. We are looking forward to learning more about the EAB and the pine wilt disease here. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony, and thank you everybody else for watching in. If I don't know what it's like in the rest of the state, but in Brookings, it's almost too nice of a day to be inside. And just a quick note to all the ISA certified arborists. Tony is not looking for extra work just because he's bored. ISA did require now that we collect further information on you, the need for the email address. Otherwise, they will not accept it. And again, I'm not saying that as a complaint. It's an international organization, lots of chapters, and they do need that to make it function quicker for getting all these in. So please comply with that. It adds to Tony's workload, and I certainly appreciate him doing that for all of us that are looking for credit out there. But let's get started here today. Now, again, if no one watching this is saying, what is emerald ash borer pine wilt disease? I get that. And so what we're going to do is kind of go over the basics, but not a lot of time on that because we want to go into what's new. And so what's new? Where is it? Interesting enough, it is sitting around in a couple of spots here. Of course, last year we found it in Millbank and in Watertown. They had found it previously in almost central North Dakota, and then of course now more recently it was found in Fargo area, and that so it is kind of hitting our eastern edge of both states. We're missing a couple of counties, Moody County, for example, which is kind of interesting, as few as Hamlin and that. But, you know, again, we can only tell you where it is. We can't tell you where it isn't because I haven't looked at every ash tree in Moody County, for example. And there's where we're looking at the whole thing here for South Dakota. It's popping up everywhere. We're getting a couple more new finds down by Beatsford here and that. So you can pretty much say in Lincoln and Union and Minnehaha County, it's pretty much throughout. though a little harder to find in some cases. But you take looking at shelter belts in those three counties, and you can certainly tell emerald ash borer has been in that area for a considerable amount of time. And then, of course, Brookings a couple of years ago, and then Watertown and Millbank this last year. Now, again, that's when we confirmed it. It was easy to tell from Millbank that it had been there at least 3, possibly 4 years before we'd even found it. So again, when we say we found it this year, that doesn't mean it arrived this year. It means it's been there for several years. That's always the case when we're finding new infestations of EAB. We don't find the first bug in the first tree. Again, if you take a look at North Dakota, it's one rest area right out there between Jamestown and Aberdeen, and it's spread out from there. And even though it had been found in Moorhead a number of years ago, they finally found it on the other side of the river in Fargo, so that county is also quarantined. And I do want to point out an interesting thing with Winnipeg. Winnipeg, it was found up there, about the same time we found it in Sioux Falls. But all the way up to 24, only 22 trees were infested, despite the fact they have a lot of ash. Undoubtedly, the winter is contributing a lot to that. It is expanding now, so it's not like it'll never move, but it's certainly, the farther north you go, the slower the populations expand. So that is some hope to North Dakota, particularly northern North Dakota. It's not that it won't get there. It's not that it won't kill trees. It's just it'll be at a slower rate than, for example, they found in Iowa, Nebraska, Michigan, and that where it went much quicker. And I would even call that for Sioux Falls, where it spread very, very, very quickly. So, what are we going to talk about regarding emerald ash borer, that small Agralis beetle, which is Tony mentioned, I'm sure all you're aware of, it's actually from China. In fact, they even know the location where it came from, just not the particular spot, but the region, because doing all the studies with it. And it was found east of Beijing. And having been in that area, it looks a lot like western Minnesota and eastern South Dakota. So it is kind of at home here in our area. And we also can tell when infestations occur, because somebody might wonder, well, John, how do you know it had been there 4 years? This is a phloem feeding insect, so it feeds in the phloem tissue, and the tree has to produce new phloem tissue every year. And so you can look at the rings, and you can see down here in the lower right hand part of this picture, you'll see this oval shaped powder, which we call frass. That's a gallery created by an emerald ash borer, and they only feed in that ear's phloem tissue. They go a little into the sapwood for the winter, but they're not like our native borers that'll dip down several growth rings and dip up. And so you can count the growth rings since that was made, and in that case, you can tell in that branch that insect had been there 4 years. So 4 years ago is when that branch was infested. And you can look up in the upper left and you'll see one as well. And counting that one back, it was about 4 years as well. So what we do is we dissect some trees, and from that, at least get an idea of how long the insect has been there. Because the importance of that is to give the community how much more time they have before it just blows up and almost becomes unmanageable if they haven't already starting taking care of it. And of course, now Watertown is in that, and their city forester Larry is doing a great job. They were planning for it. They are doing work for it. They have a tough go though, because they have a lot of ash-lined streets, or they had. They've been aggressively removing trees and replanting, of course. And then our smaller communities probably have the toughest time of all, because they rarely have the resources to manage it. And so they tend to be more removals than planting, and the removals often come rather late rather than before the emerald ash borer attacks the trees. And so you're out there trying to take down trees that are half dead or completely dead. And as a reminder to everyone, a standing dead ash tree can fall in unpredictable ways. We do not want standing dead ash trees to remain there because they could fall almost at, I don't want to say at any time, that's a little dramatic, uh, but they can fail in ways and times you cannot really predict. And of course, that impacts shelter belts and the woods that we see. Here's a whole bunch of standing dead ash trees in a grove, and you can already see how many are lying on the ground there that have already fallen within the last year. Well, most of you know what to look for, but as a reminder, this is the classic symptom pattern for a tree infested with emerald ash borer. You have this really tight cluster of water sprouts right around the lower branches, where the lower branches connect and the tree canopy's out. They'll be deep green, they'll be very long, very succulent. The reason for this is the girdling by the emerald ash borer has choked off the movement of sugars and other photosynthates from the leaves down to the root system. And so the roots are starving. And their means of trying to live are to get the tree through their plant hormone system, their signaling to produce all these sprouts. Hey, let's get a canopy back really quickly. We need some food down here. And so that'll be appearing at the base. And then above that bright green tuft, you'll have this opening where all these branches are thinning out. And then there'll be tufts at the end too. So it's almost like you have a deep green core there. This line you can see all the way through where it's fairly open and then tufts above that. This is classic pattern for emerald ash borer. If it was just discrete dieback that you had leaves in the lower part of the tree, but not this tufting, and the top of the canopy was dead, that's called normal in South Dakota for an ash tree. You get out and take a look at drought damage on ash, and a lot of them look that way anyway. So that dieback on ash, it's not symptomatic where this one is. And the blonding, of course. Now, the blonding is where you'll find that outer layer of bark shrugged off, and that's due to the woodpeckers searching for emerald ash borer. And so on a tree where you find a lot of this blonding, where the lower layer of bark is revealed, you'll also find the drill holes about a quarter inch or so from the woodpeckers. And by the way, the woodpeckers are very good at finding them. They recognize these trees before the rest of us do. Now, I do need to add that we have a native ash borer, in fact, two, the red-headed ash borer and the banded ash borer. And both of those will feed in the phloem tissue too for a short time period before they go deeper into the tree. And during that time period, they're also very vulnerable to attacks by woodpeckers. So I do want to point out that if we do see blonding, it doesn't necessarily mean absolutely 100% that that's emerald ash borer. It might be the native ash borers, and I need to come out and look. But if you see both the symptoms that I've just discussed, that tufting of green at the base, that openness, and then small tufts at the very top of the tree, and then on a lot of the branches, but not all of them, that streaking of the blonding with woodpecker pecks, that's probably emerald ash borer. And if it's in a county where we do not know of an infestation, that's where I really do need a call. Because either myself or one of our other foresters will come out and look at it. Eventually, I will come out and look at it because I have to confirm it in order to really establish the quarantines. But our entire division will certainly get out and look at any of these trees that fit that pattern. Send pictures first, of course, so we can make sure the patterns are correct. But underneath that bark, now we have the smoking gun, the galleries. The serpentine galleries, we say that, they wind back and forth and they kill the tissue around it. It becomes discolored. This is emerald ash borer. They have the galleries filled with that frass. Essentially, it's insect poop as they're feeding, and you'll see it winding back and forth. Now, I do need to have a life form. I have to find the larvae, the pupa, an adult to confirm a new county. So I can't just look at this as I did in Brookings and say, yeah, I know that's emerald ash borer. But until I find a life form, which means a little bit more looking, but was able to find it that day, to say that, aha, yes, indeed, we do have that insect. Because every now and then, even our red-headed will form a pattern very similar to this. And we don't want to quarantine a county unless we need to. And if I find the larvae, that's real easy. I can identify the larvae. We have 16 different agralis larvae in South Dakota. We did a study of them back before EAB arrived. And the bell-shaped segments and a couple of other key features are what I use to identify the larvae and separate that from the bronze birch borer, for example, which is a close relative. And we also have a hackberry borer. We have two that attack honey locust, for example. We even have one that's very tiny that attacks ash that's native. I found that up by Redfield in that. So it's not enough to find this kind of white worm, creamy white worm crawling underneath there that looks rather flat, but actually be able to identify the larvae as well. Now, again, the host is a key there as well. I will not find emerald ash borer in anything but ash, and I won't find bronze birch borer in anything but birch. So that does make the job a little easier as well. And then the adults, just as reminders, we're going to go into summer. The jewel beetle, which is one of many jewel beetles, and this one attacks cottonwoods and poplar. So we find it statewide, but it is a buprestid. So it is close related to emerald ash borer, kind of, let's say, a distant cousin, but it's a little bit bigger and a little bit wider, as you no doubt can see. About 12 to 20 millimeters. Millimeters are easy to do. 25 millimeters to an inch, so about a half an inch to just under an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and much wider. And you'll notice the speckling on the elytra. Those are the wing covers you see there. And then the emerald ash borer, as an example, is much smaller. Now there is an overlap between the two, as you can see. But that's going to be about, a little bit smaller. And by the way, I made a mistake there. It's 8 to 14. I apologize. I just noticed that. But 8 to 14. So there's a little overlap, but it's definitely, or almost definitely, always smaller than this. And of course, it doesn't have the spotted wing covers. It has the metallic green, emerald green, good Irish bug from China. And by the way, you'll rarely find the emerald ash borer. They will drop, they'll move away if you happen to come upon one. And they typically spend a lot of their time in the upper part of a canopy that's declining because they're like cats. They like to sit in the sun. Well, when do we find them out? So here's the entire life cycle of emerald ash borer. Now, in South Dakota, they have a 1-year life cycle. Now, for all the North Dakotans watching this, I will not be too surprised at all to find a 2-year life cycle north of Fargo. Let's say Grand Forks and that, when it eventually arrives up there. And I will also say, when infestations first start, we often see a 2-year life cycle. So for the first year, 2018, when I confirmed emerald ash borer, and I confirmed it in May, there were larvae in the tree. They weren't pupa or pre-pupa. There were larvae, and that did not surprise me because early on you do. Now the infestation is established. I never find larvae at this time of year. Okay, they are all a 1-year life cycle. So for North Dakotans, you almost might find larvae any month of the year. And again, the coldness of northern North Dakota may mean that they stay with a 2-year life cycle. And when I say 2 years, that means there are larvae over a complete year. In other words, I could go out and pick the bark away any month of the year and I'd find larvae underneath it. Where right now what we have is the adults are flying now, or beginning to fly now. They are flying down in Dakota Dunes. They are starting to emerge a little further north, and I absolutely expect them to be emerging in the Sioux Falls area right on schedule, which is right on Memorial Day. Up by Millbank, I don't expect to see that until about the first week of June. I've not looked at the developmental pattern up in Fargo, but my guess is we'd probably start seeing it emerging a little after that, say by the second week of June at the latest. It all deals with accumulating heat units. It's about 550 growing degree days. If you have Buckeyes in full bloom, you're probably going to see them start flying about a week or two after they're in full bloom, right? And if you have black locust, when black locust is in full bloom, that's typically when we start seeing them fly. And we're going to find them out there till about 1400 growing degree days, which is going to be in July. Flight peaks in mid to late June. It peaks when basswoods are in bloom. And so we do have plant indicators that can also let us know. Now, the adults live 3 to 6 weeks, and mom spends her time laying eggs, feeding on leaves, then going laying some eggs, feeding on leaves, laying some eggs, and usually in clusters of maybe anywhere from 5 to 30. And those eggs will hatch in 10 days, and the larvae immediately burrow into the tree. They spend no time on the bark like our native clearwing ash borer. They go straight in. And at about 650 growing degree days, so we're talking about June, is middle of June and later, that's when I'm going to start seeing them. And we have first, second, third, and fourth instars. Instars means molts. In other words, they're gradually getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we have what's either called a fifth instar or sometimes even called a prepupy. You'll find both terms being used almost interchangeably. I prefer to call it a fifth instar, but that is the overwintering larval stage. It'll literally curl like a cat in the sapwood of the tree. And then at about 100 growing degree days, so that's April, it comes back out as that spring, if you will, straightens and shortens as a true prepupa. And now they're in the pupal stage right now. And I'll be showing you pictures of this. And of course, with the adults flying. And so there's the adult. And the adults do feed on leaves. They won't defoliate a tree. They don't feed on that much. And mom has to feed on leaves between laying eggs. She'll feed on leaves, go lay some eggs, feed on leaves, and go lay some eggs. And that's important in how we manage it. And when she lays eggs, they're really hard to find. They're 1 millimeter. They're pretty tiny. Think of the poor grad students we have looking at these darn things. And you don't find them on the bark, you find them kind of underneath the bark flakes. You know how flaky some of the ash bark can be? Mom likes to kind of hide the eggs a little underneath that. And at bark ridges where the trunk and the branches meet, you get that upswelling. She'll lay eggs there. Now, by the way, our native ants love to eat these eggs. They're kind of like omelets for them. And so even our native insects enjoy a meal out of these. But they're not easy to see. And surprisingly, there's an insect, a scale insect, that's almost the same size. And so that adds to the difficulty of finding these. But, after about 10 days or so, those eggs hatch. And then see how small that first instar is? Now, that first instar is almost tickling the tree. It's really not doing any damage yet. Its tunnels aren't that deep and its tunnels aren't that long. So in June, we're not seeing any damage caused by the insect yet, at least for that year. But the third instar, absolutely. That's why sometimes we start noticing a little wilting, a little bit more decline by August, because the insect literally plowing through the phloem tissue. It's devouring all the phloem tissue and even is getting thick enough that it's etching the sapwood as well. And that's kind of important because most of our chemicals are taken up through the sapwood. And this allows them to interact with the insect very easily. They're feeding in the same tissue that the chemicals being carried up in. And you can see this tight pattern going back and back and back. And then the fourth instar, by October, they've quit feeding. First part of October, they're done. And now they dive a little deeper into the tree. On thick bark, sometimes they'll move into the bark too, but most of the time in our trees, I'll find them dive a little deeper into the sapwood. And you can always find it because you see that little pile of sawdust? I've had tree companies say, we're pulling bark away, and they're doing it in November. I said, we don't find anybody. I said, when you see a gallery like that, that's this year's, and then you see it one part, you get this elliptical thing with all the dust in there. You peel that way, and you might have to go down half an inch, but you'll find the chamber, and you'll find that little insect curled up just like that, literally curled up back on itself. Again, my cat analogy, curled up like a cat. And that's how they spend the winter. Very well protected, from the cold at least. And then in the spring, they shrink and they're straight again, but they're stubbier. And this would be, like April and May, and you can use my knife as a scale. But that's what the pre-pupa looks like, and that they're not that big. And then right now, the pupal stage in that chamber, it's starting to look like an emerald ash borer, isn't it? And it's developed the eye spots. Do you see the two dots there? Those are the eye spots. And so when you get that, you got less than a week before the delivery, all right, before this emerges out of the tree. And so that's what I'm seeing right now in Sioux Falls is they're finding some with the eye spots on it. Now you get further south in Dakota Dunes, you'll find them like this. They've already turned color. Now that's still a pupil, but it's just about ready to emerge. And you might wonder, how does it get out? The larvae, before they go in that little chamber, they literally chew a hole almost up and out of the bark. So this literally has to crawl up that little tunnel and just do a little nibbling and it's out. So the hole's already made for it. So you can follow that along and that. But when you find those, it's gonna be emerging pretty quickly. And it'll be emerging out of D-shaped holes. Now I always get asked, well, what's a D-shaped hole? If it doesn't look like a D, if when you look at it, you can't say that's a D, it's not emerald ash borer. If you have to look at it and think about it, it's not emerald ash borer. Our native ash borers, the banded ash borer and the red-headed ash borer, two that are fairly similar. They're both beetles again. For those, it can be what I call a fuzzy D. It's more oval than D-shaped, but those are the ones sometimes people confuse. But it literally should look like that, and there it is coming out of it. It's kind of peeking out, and it's just about getting ready to fly. Now, it can take them 45 minutes to completely get out of the tree. It's not like 1 minute they're there and the next minute they're flying. And birds can grab them while they're coming out. They're pretty vulnerable at that stage. And there's one. They spend a lot of time walking on the barks of trees, and usually in a sunny location. But I mean, there is the emerald ash borer, and there's lichens on the bark of the tree. I mean, you can see how small these are compared to the bark flakes on this. And that was one lucky picture. I just had to stand there, and one landed right next to me. And I had just enough time to get camera phone up there and get a picture before it realized I was there and just took off again. Now, by the way, ash are home to a lot of other insects, and the one you'll find in almost every tree, and any tree with emerald ash borer too, by the way, is our native ash bark beetles. They're native. They're always here. They tend to be branch killers or going after dying branches. But you pull the bark away, you will find them, and they'll make these little pockets, and you'll find very little. Generally, an adult beetle is what you're going to notice. And to give you an idea, that's how big the adult beetle is on the tip of that. They're pretty darn small. All right, so what are we going to do about it? Well, first of all, as we've always said, treat valuable ash trees, trees that are a tree you really want to keep, a tree that really looks nice. But again, only if EAB is found within 15 miles of your location. So if you're farther out than that eastern counties, it's a little premature to start treating. I know there's some people that, I don't want to risk losing my tree. Well, you know what? You're probably okay. And the further into the state you are, the less likely it is to find it right away. Though again, I mean, look at the first find in North Dakota, rest area. So it doesn't mean that our next find couldn't be in Timber Lake, for example. And again, we've not found it in Timber Lake, but it wouldn't surprise me. Only because they can pop up anywhere a car stopped. And there's lots of ways of treating these trees. Lots of different materials out there, a lot of different methods. But here's the hard, fast rule. Spring is best. All the studies have shown spring injections, trunk injections are the best way to do it, and they're done at the root flare. So if you're going to treat a tree, it should be done by trunk injection on the flare and at the proper number of ports. In other words, holes. Sometimes people want to skip doing some because, well, I got to drill more, but no, 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 no. You can't say, I'm going to put the same amount of chemical in, but I'm going to do it in fewer holes. Don't. Whatever the manufacturer recommends, which is going to be about this much usually, that's pretty close. Because what you want to do is have thorough coverage in the trunk and all the branches. If you do it too far apart, you're going to miss some branches in that tree. They're going to go unprotected. And then emamectin benzoate is the gold standard for treatments. That is the best. The imidacloprid is not nearly as effective only because it is xylem mobile and it doesn't seem to pick up enough of the insects to do a job. I might add too, there is at least one company uh, trying to promote a mix of bacteria and such as a means of killing the insect and basing it off the University of Minnesota work, which has been done with fungi that kill the emerald ash borer. I've talked to the researchers at University of Minnesota. Their work is quite different than what's being promoted by these companies. And they do not use them as a means of killing the insect. In other words, they're not preparing the fungi. In the future, perhaps one day, but it's one day. And they are not endorsing any products being sold right now saying based on University of Minnesota work. And when do you want to start? You want to start when the leaves begin to open. So we are in that window, the perfect window for treatments. You do need the leaves starting to come out to really help pull that chemical up. And it can take as much as 30 days. Now, some people, well, it's up there the next day. No, it's not. It does take some time to make sure you got fairly thorough coverage. So, that May, June, early June is the ideal time for a lot of South Dakota. In North Dakota, you can go a little further, of course. And the reason for that is ash produces a new plumbing system before it puts out leaves. And you want to make sure that new plumbing system is set. And that new plumbing system is just beneath the bark, just inside of the inner bark, of course. And that's where you're trying to put the chemical in. This is why you don't want to drill too deep either. You want the chemical to move up, not just be absorbed by the tree. Well, and that's why this window from mid-May to mid-June is in most of the area is just an ideal time to do treatments. And again, it's far more effective. And by getting the chemical in there, you're going to have a lot more bang for your buck, if you will. And the reason for that is the chemical's in now and gets up into the leaves. You'll kill mom before she lays eggs or before she lays a lot of eggs. Because remember, mom has to feed on leaves before she lays eggs. She's going to land on your tree, nibble on some foliage, and then lay eggs. And she's going to nibble and she's going to eat a very poisonous meal and she's going to die. And if by some chance a mom landed on a tree and laid eggs without feeding on that tree first, you're going to kill the larvae when they're really tiny. So that's why we strongly recommend that you do your treatments in the spring. And I also want to show you this, our treatments and tree mortality curve. So we're going to start looking at the left side, and that's the interval between treatments. And those are years. Okay, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4 years, and that's from the initial find and such. You'll notice that the injections are done every other year, up to about 10 years. Okay. And that means the trunks are thoroughly, well, not trunks, the tree is thoroughly protected. And emamectin benzoate is an interesting chemical, and that tree absorbs it and then will release it the next year as well. I mean, that's why you can get 2 years of treatment very easily. But then notice as you start getting beyond that 10-year point where we're coming up fairly quickly to Sioux Falls, is you can start lengthening the time between treatments. And you're not doing that because the chemical suddenly becomes more effective. It's because most of the untreated ash trees are gone. And so our beetle population has dropped, and the trees can withstand a little damage between treatments. And to stretch it out 3 years is not a problem. You can say, well, we're going to treat it every 3 years. And you might do that for 2 more treatments and then stretch it out every 4 years. So I mentioned this back in 2018. I'm going to ask everybody to treat every other year for the first 10 years, but with the promise that you can stretch it. And of course, you look at Sioux Falls, 2027, if that's the next time to treat your tree, for example, you live in Sioux Falls, and you or your applicator says, you know what, we're going to treat now 2027, but we're not coming back to 2030, I would be completely okay with that. Now, don't stop treatment completely. You will lose the tree eventually, but you can stretch out that time period. And that mirrors the mortality that usually year 7 or so is where you start losing most of your trees. It starts going up and up and up, and then it plummets because most of your trees are dead by then. And that doesn't mean all your trees were infested in year 7 or 8. That means they died year 7 or 8 after the infestation was noted. Okay, and then you notice the death rate just plummets. Why? Because there just aren't a lot of ash. That's why. But if they're left untreated, eventually they'll be killed, but not nearly as quickly. And like I say, Sioux Falls, we're right about there now. There's not a lot of ash left. Not a lot of live ash left, I might add. There's some people still need to take care of those standing dead ones. And we're certainly encouraging people to continue doing treatments. But again, 2027, you can start stretching out 2028 as well. And then reduce the ash population, get out there and do the removals. So here we are marking ash trees down in Dakota Dunes, and they followed their inventory and they quickly replanted. But let me tell you something exciting we're doing in Millbank. Millbank, which has a lot of ash trees, both in properties and along streets, we're using herd immunity. What that means is very carefully looking at what trees to be treated by either the homeowner or by the city, and looking at where all the ash trees are and developing a pattern. And the reason why is emerald ash borer flies about 300 feet. And so they might take off from that tree, land on a treated tree and die, or from there land on a treated tree and dies. The odds are pretty good. So what we're saying is you treat that one ash tree, you've protected all the ash trees around it without having to treat them. Now, again, that's something that Tanner Atkin here, a graduate student at SDSU and the horticulturist here for the campus, has for his thesis. And again, it does work. So herd immunity, treating trees in a very carefully set pattern every couple of years, and you can rotate that among these trees, provides significant protection around the surrounding trees that you will not lose them at a very good cost saving to the city, particularly against removing all the ash. Well, a little bit on pine wilt. Pine wilt's been in the state for a long time, I think 83 or so. But here's the symptoms, and you're seeing this right now. There's a lot of Scotch pine trees that kind of quickly declined late last fall. And I mean, very quickly last fall. And now this spring, they've got all their needles hanging. That's not drought, it's pine wilt disease. And as Tony mentioned, this is the reverse thing. This is exotic trees, but a native pathogen. The pine wood nematode's native to North America. They believe down in the south coastal area, and has moved through the country, or certainly the eastern half, and is now moving into the Front Range and such. And so it attacks or kills, I should say, are non-native pines, such as Scotch pine, its favorite host, and Austrian pine, but it will also attack large mugo pines, for example. And so there's the way the trees look, and they do not recover. They're in, the infestation occurs in the summer, and then they're dead by fall. It can be that quick. It is that quick, should say. So here we're looking at an Austrian pine late summer, and it was dead. And the other one's gone now too, by the way. Now, the discoloration may start as a single branch at the beginning of the season. And by the beginning of the season, I mean when their flight period is. So that's actually midsummer that you'll notice it. And then that same tree, about 3 months later, uh, tree's completely gone. And no, you couldn't prune out that one branch and save it. But that was one branch that showed symptoms, and they go very fast. And a blue stain's introduced into that tree along with the nematode, and I'll explain that in a moment. And the blue stain helps finish off the tree as well. The wood is dry, it's light, it's not sticky anymore, it lacks the resin, and you'll have all the streaks of blue in it. You will always find blue stain in a tree that has been killed by the pinewood nematode. Well, how do both of these get around? It's on Sawyer beetles. And white spotted Sawyer is very common eastern end of the state. We have a few more out west. But literally the disease, the fungal disease and the nematode will hitchhike on this insect as it emerges in the spring and early summer. So as it leaves, it's taking it with them to introduce into the next tree. And the introduction can be just as simple as this. Mom Sawyer beetle makes an egg niche, carves a little bit out of the wood there to lay eggs, and the nematode and that escapes right through there. She also feeds on a few needles. It can escape in there. So it could occur out on a branch first where they escape and get into the tree. And someone did a study and came up with tens of thousands can hitchhike on a single Sawyer beetle. So they will carry fairly large populations out. And that's what the Sawyer beetle larvae look like. These big kind of fat insects that'll be feeding in there. And they create all this kind of shreddy sawdust you'll find as well. And of course, they're known as Sawyer beetles because of that sawing, chewing sound they make. But they're also known as longhorn beetles, and you probably can see why, because of the long antennae. Now, here's the Sawyer beetle's life cycle. The flight can begin in May, but it's really June that it kicks off. And by June, I'm talking about central South Dakota, mid part of South Dakota. So it'd be a little later in North Dakota, a little earlier in southern. And at that point, they're flying out of dead Scots pines. And they're carrying a lot of the nematodes and the spores for the blue vein fungi. They are, as the adults feed on the tree, they introduce the nematode in there along with the blue stain, and those two kill the tree by fall. Just flat out kill it. Well, Sawyer beetles can feed on recently dead wood, so they're just as happy as could be feeding in that host. They move into the sapwood, then they move a little deeper, they move back. They pupate, form that little cocoon underneath the bark. And what's interesting is before the adults emerge, they release a chemical, a signal, and that actually attracts the nematode to their body. And then they're carried to the next one. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of like a conductor. All aboard, the train is leaving. Now, where is this? It's found in South Dakota, not North Dakota yet, as far as I know. And we kind of look at the samples here. By we, I mean the diagnostic lab that we have here. Connie's very heavily involved in that. person who really manages it from day to day and does a lot of the work. Um, in here, you can see it was first really found in 79 and then 80, 83, 84. But it's up in northern South Dakota. I mean, I can see North Dakota from infested trees. So it's going to appear there. But you even have it in Wyoming and in the Front Range. Sheridan, they've got it there now. And so it gets really spotty as you get further west, but in Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, it's very uniform. I mean, you'll find it. Now, there'll still be some live trees, but you'll pretty much find it everywhere. And why is it moving north? Well, a couple ways to look at it. You need warm summers. And one way is a mean daily temperature above 77 degrees for 55 days, which is your summer. So warm summer, okay? You need that for the nematode. And you need below normal rainfall. And so think of it. We're having warmer summers. We're having drier periods. The upper end of our state's a little cooler and has been a little wetter. It's northern South Dakota is not in a drought yet. So again, it slowed, but it finally did reach there. And you can find trees being killed up in that area fairly easily, but it's not as widespread as in Yankton, where I can still find an occasional healthy Scotch pine, but it was just missed. But they've lost many of them down there in the last couple of years. And again, as our summer's warm, you're going to start seeing it more in North Dakota. And that eventually it'll be there. It wouldn't surprise me if next year's 27's update says, well, you know what? It's found in Jamestown. We'll see. But it kills them. We've years ago said, do not plant Scotch pine and Austrian pine in South Dakota. And I will tell you, and by that was in the late 1990s. We were telling people that. And nothing I hate more than going out to a windbreak that's 20 years old of Scotch pine and watching them being killed by this because there was no reason the district should have planted them. The Big Sioux Nursery and myself were telling people, lay off the planting of these. I mean, if you want to plant a tree or two, go ahead. But a windbreak, yeah. I mean, this is Yankton down in 2005 at Lewis and Clark because that had been planted years before, of course, with a lot of Scots and a lot more Austrian pines, and they were losing them. And this is the Big Sioux Nursery in their block of Scots pines. And they said, when I first found it there, I think it was 2014, I said, well, what are you going to do? And they said, well, we'll leave them there and see if any turn out to be resistance. And it doesn't appear that any are. It's going through and killing those at a fairly good rate as well. Well, what do you do? Well, the best is any tree that's died, any tree that's standing out there dead right now, even get it down, get it burned, because otherwise the beetles are leaving. We say April 1st. Why? Because people procrastinate. And if we say April 1st and you're down in Yankton, yeah, get it done by then. If you're in Watertown, yeah, you're probably still okay because it's a little cooler. Aberdeen, sure, go ahead. But I'd still rather everybody get them down by April 1st because then it's done. If you haven't done these yet, Memorial Day is coming up, get the trees down and burn them. Don't stack them for firewood. And you want to get them all. Now, there are treatments, but I am not going to oversell these treatments. The treatments for emerald ash borer flat out work. You inject the tree with the proper chemical, the proper rate at the proper time. It's not 100%, but it's pretty darn close survival. I mean, it's that good. With this, it's not. There are treatments. We have companies using them, but some companies are literally telling the client, I am not guaranteeing this at all. You can only treat trees that are not infested. Now, the 3-year survival rate in one study, and this wasn't as controlled a study as you might think, showed they had 96% survival on trees they treated. Interesting enough, 75% survival on trees they just injected with water. Apparently, just the injection process causes a reaction in the tree, and then the untreated just about a third. I think one reason this doesn't work, quite honestly, is people are treating the trees too late. Like now, which would be too late. You want to do it in April. and are treating a tree in, let's say, late May or June, and are treating a tree that's already infected and nobody can see it yet. In other words, in June, the beetles already brought it. So, and these products do not work on trees that are already infested or infected, if you prefer the term. It only works if they're not infested. And I think that's one of the problems. So the only way I would do this is do it in April. Infested trees down by April 1st. Hell, you take them down all winter. Do that. But at least by April 1st, get it. And any trees that you like, I would treat in April. And if I miss that window, I'd be very cautious about treating, particularly in June, because it may be a tree that is already infected. And again, they can go pretty quick. The other thing too is when you remove the tree, remove the stump. Cut it flush with the ground because even the stump can contain some of these. Well, last, I want to do this for 5 minutes. The third problem, and it's going to be limited. And if you're watching this from North Dakota, you can just sit back and laugh because it's not going to show up in North Dakota. And this is an exotic tree and exotic pest problem. How's that? And this is spotted lanternfly you've heard so much about. That's what the adult looks like. That's in late summer. It's not a fly. It's not a moth. It's a hopper in that. So it's kind of an unusual insect. And it sucks the sap out. It and its young. And the trees will just drip sap after that. And it'll be covered with honeydew. So it gets very, very sticky. I mean, you stand out east and you can just watch this continue to drip. And the honeydew gets on your furniture, your car, everything. It's not a tree killer. Now, if you have a vineyard, yes, this is a serious problem for vineyards. But for most people, no. You know where the problem is? It's going to be in recreational areas. Because who wants to recreate when you're having all this stuff dripping on you all the time? And certainly your home too, or your car if it's outside. Now, this is what the egg mass looks like. And for all you folks watching from down in the Yankton area, uh, if you ever see something like that, I want to call because this should do well in Yankton. How's that? But right now at this time of year, you'll find those egg masses, and they're little lines like that. You can see my finger there as a sign. And I took this picture in Maryland, by the way. And you can see they almost get like this corrugation to them too. And now they're hatching. This was a few weeks ago in Maryland, and that's what the young look like. And they scurry around and they feed by sucking sap out too. And then later in the season become the adults. Now, why am I saying North Dakotans can sit and chuckle and everybody in Yankton ought to be, oh my gosh, another problem, particularly in your recreational areas? This insect and tree of heaven are closely tied together. Now, this insect can suck sap out of lots of different plants, particularly grapevines. So, again, vineyards are a real problem. And vineyards down in the southern end of our state, that's going to be an issue. But this is kind of its native host where it likes to feed. And this is where you're going to find the eggs laid quite often and where you're going to find a lot of other things. And there's tree of heaven growing in Yankton. There are tree of heaven down in Yankton that are 50 feet tall, 2 feet in diameter. And if you go along the river, they've naturalized. Now, the interesting thing is the insect, it appears that it has to feed, well, it can feed on lots of different trees. It has to feed on tree of heaven during part of its life to really reach its full potential. And that's why North Dakota will have some suitable hosts, but it doesn't have tree of heaven. We're down in Yankton, they've got the perfect storm. They have tree of heaven and they have everything else. Now, the leaves look a lot like walnut, but they have these little glands at the base of the leaflets, and the bark is a little smoother than on a walnut. And they produce not a walnut, but the samaras that hang. And I took that picture in Pierce, so it gives you an idea of where else they're found. And there's one in Sioux Falls as an ornamental tree. And here they are around Chamberlain. They've naturalized along the river. Tree of Heaven down in Dakota Dunes. So here you go, people. This is where you find, now again, I can find a couple in Sioux Falls, not very many. But you get down along the river and follow the river all the way up to Pier and then all the way out to Kadoka along the rivers there, you can find tree of heaven. And so when this does arrive in South Dakota, now it was first found in Pennsylvania. I forget when, somewhere in the 2010s. And now it's all the way out to Chicago. Now, again, it's spotty. Why? Mom sometimes lays egg masses on something else, like a recreational vehicle or something else, and somebody drives it out and the eggs hatch. So it's not like it's in every state or every city from Chicago all the way out to Baltimore. The highest density is out by Baltimore, of course, but you can find it there. And I fully expect this is going to appear in southern South Dakota. Now, the good thing is the insect doesn't fly very far. And they've looked at for campgrounds, if you can clear out all the tree of heaven within 3 miles as a radius from your campground, you're probably not going to see much of a problem. So down along the river, some of those recreational areas, I mean, I know everybody's dealing with emerald ash borer down there too, at least preparing for emerald ash borer. And they got a little bit more time to prepare for this, but I'd certainly have tree of heaven on the naughty list for Vermilion and Yankton, that you can't plant it at least. And I would strongly encourage people to remove them because maybe 15 years from now, we start seeing it show up there, but the inevitability of it. So with that, that's our update. Again, I'm not giving the CU credit for it because nowadays, all those folks that wanted the ISA CU credits did already give Tony your information needed, including your email address, so that we can submit that. Again, the other thing, as a reminder, ISA says this, and Tony, I should have mentioned this to you too, that they're also reminding us, I got an email from them, it can take up to 6 weeks for these to appear. Expect a long time before they may appear. It might be as quick as 4 weeks, but just wait for 6 before you bother to see if there was an issue with it. And by the way, we do keep a copy of all these, so if there's a problem, we should be able to find it. So with that, I'm going to stop the sharing. There we go. That was a dismal. By that, it was all gloom and doom. And for everybody, next month in June, we've got we're into summer then. And for the month of June, we're going to look at the best ornamental trees. And by best, we're not just talking about pests or the lack thereof. We're talking about what trees provide the best fall color, the best flowers, the most attractive fruit, or no fruit. So if you want to look at the plus side, whether you're in Minot or in Dakota Dunes, that'll be an upbeat one on all the best trees for the Dakotas. So with that, I'll turn it back to Tony. I don't know if we have any questions or if people are just so sad of hearing all the bad news or what. I see
I got a
Lisa's
few
on from
questions.
Yankton, so
Thanks,
sure.
Dr. Ball, and thank you everybody for putting your ISA credentials in the chat there. Very helpful in getting these recorded. A couple quick questions as we reach the top of the hour here. Josh is curious, do adult emerald ash borer only eat ash leaves or do they eat other leaves?
Excellent question. And they can force feed them on other leaves. In other words, we're going to put you in a cage and your only diet is others and they'll feed on it. But no, it's pretty much ash leaves. Good question.
What's a good control for tree of heaven?
The control of tree of heaven is cut them flat with the ground and use a herbicide because they will sprout back. We're going to come up with a little fact sheet on how to take care of it. Again, we don't have it here, but you can't just
we have around here.
you just can't cut them down. If you cut them down, they'll sprout like crazy. The Tordon, the Grazons, and of course those you have to be very careful about it. But you do want to treat the stumps, and we'll have a fact sheet on that. So it's cutting the tree and treating the stumps is the only way to get rid of the tree.
George is curious, can emamectin benzoate be used as a soil drench?
No. Um, That one is almost always applied as a trunk
Injection.
injection, put in the tree. The imidacropin is the one that's far more often used as a soil drench or as a soil injection. And then ditephtheron is another chemical of the three, and that's used as a basal bark spray. You literally spray the trunk of the tree, the lower 8 feet.
Now, Chrissy has two questions. One, can other pine beetles introduce blue stain? And
Oh,
how do you determine pine wilt death from drought death?
okay. Uh, by the way, blue stain is carried by a lot of beetles. So you'll find it in trees that were attacked by mountain pine beetle. You'll find it in trees attacked by pine engraver beetle. And so you could find a pine tree that was attacked by our our pine engraver beetles, that the blue stain was introduced by that insect. Eastern part of the state where we typically don't have a lot of the bark beetles, it's going to be almost exclusively the Sawyer beetles. And by the way, the Sawyer beetle is the only one to carry the nematode. So while there are other bark beetles that will carry the blue stain fungus, only the Sawyer beetles are known to carry the nematode. And then the other question was on wilt.
Yeah, how do you determine between pine wilt and drought decline
Okay.
or death?
Um, well, first of all, we only find pine wilt in trees that are more than 10 feet tall. It's got to be attractive enough for the Sawyer beetles to go after it. And so if it's a young tree that died quickly, that's drought. But if it's a 20-foot tall tree that seemed to have died quickly, one of the easiest ways to check is if the twigs can snap. Now I know they'll snap for drought too, but I mean this dries out a tree much faster than drought would, and so they'll snap off by late summer. The other one would, of course, be finding the egg niches in the trunk of the tree. But if you absolutely do need to know, contact us. A sample can be submitted, but it has to be very carefully done to make sure that we get the nematode. And by the way, if the tree's already completely dead, the nematodes are gone. And so we're not going to be able to have the nematodes essentially swim out. So it has to be a good sample.
And our final question here from Lauren, what other Agralis species will you see feeding on ash?
There's only one other one, and it doesn't even have a common name, but it's a small agralis, and by small, it's less than a quarter of an inch long. That's how tiny it is. And it feeds on twigs of ash trees. Now, I actually had this one and another one of them that someone found, and they're that bright green, they're that gold. And luckily, when they took a picture and sent it to me, they put a quarter next to it. And so I had the scale right away, and I knew, oh, that's way too small to be an emerald ash borer. And so these are much, much smaller than an emerald ash borer would be, 4 millimeters. So definitely very, very, very tiny. And you'll find them in twigs. But again, we can find them in South Dakota. I can collect them in our traps.
Great. Well, we're about 5 minutes past the hour. Thank
Oh,
you, everybody, for donating some extra time and getting some answers. I have put the link to our YouTube playlist in the chat box. You can go back there and find 30 or so of our previous workshops covering all sorts of different topics. And we're thrilled you joined us. Thank you very much. Just one quick reminder, Kendra, Miss Larkin, if you could put your email in your comment, I'll make sure to get your ISA credentials submitted. But thanks again to everybody for joining us. We'll see you next month when we talk about tree species.
thanks, everyone.